The room went dead silent. 37 years old, worn jacket, calloused hands, a resume with more gaps than accomplishments. Ethan Cross stepped onto that sparring mat looking like a man who'd taken too many wrong turns in life, and every person in that room knew it. Marcus Webb, Sterling Global's unbeaten security champion, cracked his knuckles and smiled the way men smile when they already know how the story ends. He had no idea the story had already ended. 3 seconds later, he was on the floor, and the woman watching through the glass had stopped breathing entirely. If you've ever been underestimated, written off, or told you don't belong, this story is for you. Subscribe to the channel right now and follow every part of this story until the very end, because what happens next will stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me the city and country where you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now, let's go back to where it all began. The sign outside Sterling Global's headquarters read, "Security Excellence Selection, Open Recruitment," and even that felt like a joke to most of the men standing in the lobby that Tuesday morning. These weren't ordinary applicants, former Secret Service, retired law enforcement, private military contractors whose resumes ran 4 pages and whose references were generals and federal directors. They stood in clusters, arms crossed, sizing each other up with the particular wariness of men who had spent years learning to read threats before those threats could read them. Ethan Cross stood apart from all of them near the far wall, one hand wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. He wasn't sizing anyone up. I was watching the clock. He needed to be home by 6. His daughter had a science project due Thursday, and she'd already texted him twice that morning, once to remind him, once to tell him she'd found a spider in her room and wasn't touching it until he got back. He'd texted her a spider emoji in response, and she'd sent back 3 angry face emojis followed by "Dad." He almost smiled thinking about it. "You're in the wrong building, friend." Ethan turned. The man who had spoken was built like something assembled for a specific purpose. Broad across the shoulders, thick through the neck, with a jaw that looked like it had been squared off with a carpenter's level. He wore a Sterling Global badge on his chest that read M. Webb, Security Operations, and he was looking at Ethan the way people look at a stray dog that has wandered into a restaurant. "The temp agency's 2 blocks east," Webb added. "They handle day labor, landscaping, warehouse work, that sort of thing." A few of the men nearby didn't bother hiding their amusement. Ethan looked at Webb for a moment, then he looked down at his coffee cup. "Thanks," he said. "I'll keep that in mind." Webb waited for something more, a rise, a flash of embarrassment, anything. He got nothing. That seemed to bother him more than an argument would have. He walked away. Ethan drank his cold coffee. The selection process had been Victoria Sterling's idea, and it had not been a popular one. At 30 years old, she was already one of the youngest billionaire CEOs in the country, having inherited Sterling Global from her father 5 years ago, and then tripled its value through a combination of instinct, relentless work, and a willingness to make decisions that made her board deeply uncomfortable. The company operated across 14 countries, touching defense contracts, private logistics, and emerging tech infrastructure. It was large enough and sensitive enough that Victoria's personal security had become a matter of genuine institutional concern. Her previous head of protection had retired 3 weeks ago, a quiet, professional exit with a generous package and a handshake. Victoria had overseen the transition personally. She had also, quietly, rejected the first 2 candidates her board recommended without explanation. The truth was that she had a feeling she couldn't quite name yet, the kind of feeling her father used to call the itch, that low-level, persistent sense that something wasn't right, somewhere, in a direction she hadn't identified yet. She wanted someone she had chosen herself, someone no one else had vetted, which was why, when her assistant Catherine had suggested throwing the selection open to outside candidates, Victoria had not said no. Her board had objected strenuously. Liability concerns, background integrity, the unpredictability of unknown quantities. Victoria had listened to every argument and approved the open selection anyway. Now she sat in the observation room above the training floor, one leg crossed over the other, a tablet in her lap showing the morning's candidate files. Catherine stood beside her with a second tablet and a coffee that was, unlike Ethan's, still hot. "The Webb match is last," Catherine said. "His record is—" "I know his record," Victoria said. 41 consecutive wins, no losses. I know. The board wants him promoted regardless of today's outcome. Victoria looked up from her tablet. The board wants a lot of things. Catherine wisely said nothing further. The assessments moved through the morning in steady rotation. Physical evaluations, tactical scenario exercises, psychological profiling, threat recognition. 12 candidates came and went, some performing brilliantly, some collapsing under the pressure of the scenario simulations in ways that revealed more about their character than any resume could have. Ethan moved through each station without drawing attention. He wasn't slow, but he wasn't showy either. During the threat recognition exercise, a controlled room where candidates had to identify planted risks among staged interactions, he spotted all 7 correctly. The average across the morning had been 4. The proctor running the station glanced up at him afterward with an expression that flickered between surprise and professional neutrality. "You've done this before," the proctor said. It wasn't quite a question. "Little bit," Ethan said. The proctor made a note. In the observation room, Victoria had stopped looking at her tablet. She was watching Ethan Cross move through the exercises with the particular quality of attention she gave things that she couldn't quite categorize yet. He wasn't performing. That was the thing. Every other candidate, even the genuinely skilled ones, had a performance layer, awareness of the observation glass, a tendency to project competence outward rather than simply exercise it. Ethan didn't seem to know he was being watched, or if he knew, he didn't care. "Who is he?" she asked. Catherine scrolled through her tablet. Cross, Ethan R., age 37, current employment, listed as contract maintenance and odd job services. Before that, 7 years with a private logistics firm in Ohio. Before that, she paused. Military service? No specific branch recorded. Separation listed as administrative discharge 12 years ago. No further detail in the file. Victoria looked at the glass. No further detail. It's unusual, Catherine agreed. Pull everything you can find. The sparring segment was the last assessment of the day, and the room had changed by the time it started. Candidates who'd already completed their evaluations stood along the walls, some in their street clothes, some still in assessment gear. A handful of Sterling Global's existing security staff had filtered in. Word had gotten around that Webb was going last, and Webb versus anyone was worth watching. Webb himself was already on the mat, rolling his shoulders, working through the kind of pre-match routine that was partly physical preparation and partly theater. He had done this 41 times. He knew exactly what the room felt like when it belonged to him. Ethan was called last. He came from the back of the room in the same worn jacket, hands in his pockets. He had declined the loaner athletic gear that the assessment staff had offered. He'd said simply that he was fine. Someone near the wall said something quiet, and the cluster of observers around them laughed. Webb watched Ethan approach the mat and tilted his head. "You made it this far," he said. He sounded almost sympathetic. "That's more than most." "Thanks," Ethan said. "I'll be honest with you." Webb lowered his voice just enough that it didn't quite carry. A practiced move, the voice of a man who understood how to make public humiliation feel like private concern. "You could walk away right now. No one would think less of you. There's no shame in knowing your limits." Ethan stood at the edge of the mat. He looked at Webb with an expression that wasn't quite calm and wasn't quite anything else. Just present, focused on something slightly past the surface of what was in front of him. "I appreciate that," he said. "You ready?" Webb's jaw tightened. He turned to the proctor and gave a short nod. The proctor called the match. What happened next was the kind of thing people would describe differently, depending on where they were standing when it occurred. Those close to the mat would say it didn't look like a fight. It looked like a correction, a brief mechanical adjustment, the way a craftsman might realign something that had come slightly off its seating. Webb moved forward, and Ethan moved too, and somehow the middle 3 seconds of that exchange produced a result that the first second had not made predictable. Those farther back said it looked like Webb slipped, that Ethan had somehow made the mat disappear under him. A few who had trained seriously and knew what to look for would say, later and quietly, that they had never seen control applied with that degree of precision outside a demonstration by someone with a very long career and a very specific kind of training behind it. Marcus Webb was on the floor. His right arm was bent at a careful angle that caused significant pain without any structural damage. His cheek was against the mat. His eyes were open and confused in the way that eyes go confused when the information arriving is fundamentally inconsistent with what the brain had prepared for. 3 seconds. Ethan stepped back. His breathing had not changed. His jacket was still on. He reached down and offered Webb his hand. Webb stared at it for a moment. Then he took it. In the observation room, Victoria had come to her feet without realizing it. The room below was very quiet. Then it wasn't. Voices overlapping, the specific charged hum of people who have witnessed something they don't have an immediate framework for. Victoria was not looking at Webb on the mat or at the observers reacting along the wall. She was looking at Ethan's forearm. When he had reached down to help Webb up, his sleeve had pulled back 2 inches. Just 2 inches. And against the inside of his left forearm, she had seen it. Dark ink, clean lines, a tactical insignia she had spent most of her life not thinking about. Her breath stopped moving for a moment. She had seen that insignia once. She had been 19 years old. She had found it in a classified file inside her father's private study. A file that had no label on the outside, that had been kept separate from everything else, that her father had never once mentioned or explained. She had not known what the insignia meant then. She had looked at it for a long moment and then put it back exactly as she had found it, because something about its presence in that file had told her, clearly and without words, that it was not something to be understood by asking questions. She knew now. Not everything, not the details, but enough. Catherine was saying something beside her. Victoria wasn't hearing it. Below, Ethan Cross straightened his jacket sleeve with the same unhurried care he had applied to everything else that morning. He looked around the room with an expression that suggested mild interest rather than satisfaction. He bent to retrieve his cold coffee cup from where he'd set it near the wall before the match. He drank the last of it. Victoria watched him. 12 years, she thought. The file had been dated 12 years ago. Whatever that insignia connected to, whatever her father had known about it, it went back 12 years. This man was 37 years old. That would have made him 25 when that file was created. The math landed in her chest like something dropped from a height. She turned to Catherine. "Pull his full file," she said. "Everything, not just what's in the system." She paused. "And cancel my 3 o'clock." Catherine blinked. "Your 3 o'clock is the Nakamura tss. Cancel it." Catherine nodded once and reached for her phone. Victoria looked back through the glass. Below, the room was slowly recovering. Voices returning to normal levels. People breaking off into smaller conversations. A couple of the security staff helping Webb to the side bench, with the forced casualness of men pretending not to have seen what they had seen. Ethan Cross stood near the exit with his paper cup, waiting to be processed out like any other applicant who had completed their assessment and was waiting on results. He didn't look like a man who had just dismantled Sterling Global's undefeated security champion in front of 60 witnesses. He looked like a man thinking about a spider in his daughter's room. Victoria pressed her fingers flat against the observation glass. "Who are you?" she thought. Outside, a city bus rumbled past the building. The afternoon light was going pale and sideways. Inside the training floor, the proctor was logging the last of the day's assessment results. In the space between all of that, a question had opened up. Quiet, urgent, and shaped like something Victoria Sterling had been trying to ignore for a very long time. She was not going to ignore it anymore. Show more. Catherine had already gone home by the time Victoria pulled the second file. Not the digital file. The digital file was what everyone else had access to, and it told her almost nothing useful. Ethan Cross, contract work, Ohio, administrative discharge, 12 years of careful ordinariness that read less like a life and more like a cover story that someone had assembled in a hurry and never bothered to make convincing. The second file was paper. It lived in a fireproof cabinet in the private office adjacent to her father's old study, inside a drawer that required both a key and a 6-digit code her father had given her on his deathbed, along with a handwritten note that said only, "Some doors open when they're ready. Don't force them." She had not opened that drawer in 4 years. She opened it now. The file was thinner than she remembered, maybe a dozen pages, some of them photocopies, one of them a photograph. The insignia was on the second page, the same clean dark lines she had seen on Ethan's forearm that afternoon, rendered here in a classified unit designation she could now, with the resources of a global company behind her, actually decode. SEAL Team 9, Executive Protection Division, Black Tier Classification, Operational Record sealed under National Security Provision. Unit disbanded following a mission failure in, she turned the page, an operation designated Cardinal Bridge, conducted 12 years ago. She sat back. Cardinal Bridge. The mission had failed. That much was in the file. What was not in the file, what was conspicuously, deliberately absent, was why it had failed, or who had been responsible, or what had happened to the men who'd been part of it. The file simply noted that the unit had been dissolved, that all records had been transferred to a classified archive, that the matter was considered closed. Considered closed. Her father's handwriting was in the margin of that page. 2 words, in blue pen, written at an angle as if he had added them quickly. Not closed. Victoria read those 2 words 3 times. Then she picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in 8 months. But she arranged to meet Ethan the following morning, before the official notification of assessment results was scheduled to go out. She used Catherine to send the message. A brief, neutral request for a second interview, no details, a specific time, and a specific conference room on the executive floor. She half expected him not to come. He was there 11 minutes early, in the same jacket, with a cup of coffee that this time appeared to be hot. He was standing near the window when she walked in, looking out at the city below with the patient, unhurried attention of someone who had learned long ago that most things worth seeing came to you if you kept still long enough. He turned when she entered. He didn't say anything. Victoria closed the door behind her and set the file on the conference table between them. She watched his face. There it was. A fraction of a second. A stillness that moved through him from somewhere deeper than expression. His eyes went to the file and then back to her face, and in that quarter-second interval, she saw something that was not quite fear, and not quite recognition, and not quite grief. It was all 3 of those things collapsed into a single, carefully controlled breath. "Sit down," she said. Not unkindly. He sat. She sat across from him. Neither of them touched the file. "I know what the insignia is," she said. Ethan looked at the table. His hands were flat on the surface, not clenched, just resting. "How?" "My father had a file. I don't know where he got it. I don't know how much he knew." She paused. "I know about Cardinal Bridge." The name landed in the room and changed something in the air between them. Ethan's jaw shifted slightly. He looked out the window for a moment, not evasively, more like a man consulting something internal that required a brief privacy. Then he looked back at her. "What do you want?" he asked. Not hostile, just direct in the particular way of someone who has learned that directness is the only real economy. "I want to know what happened," she said. "You have a file." "The file tells me the mission failed. It tells me the unit was dissolved. It doesn't tell me anything that matters." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, the city moved through its Tuesday morning without any awareness of the conversation happening above it. "It was a protection operation," he said finally. "High-value target. Executive profile, not military. The kind of operation the Navy ran through our unit specifically because we could operate in civilian environments without the footprint of a conventional detail." He stopped. The target was a corporate whistleblower, someone who had documentation on a financial network that connected private defense contractors to foreign money channels. The kind of documentation that makes a lot of powerful people very uncomfortable. Victoria had gone very still. "We had the asset secured," Ethan continued. "Safe house, extraction route, the whole architecture. 7 men in my unit. I trusted every one of them." He looked down at his hands. "The safe house was hit 14 minutes before extraction. Not by an outside force. By a team with our access codes, our communication frequencies, our route schedule." He paused again. "Somebody sold it." "Inside your unit?" "Above my unit. The access level required to pull that information wasn't available to anyone in my team." Something crossed his face, old and tired and still somehow sharp. "The investigation went nowhere. The unit was disbanded. I was handed an administrative discharge and told that if I pursued the matter, the legal consequences would be significant." He looked at her. 3 of my men didn't make it out of that safe house. The whistleblower didn't make it out either." Victoria absorbed that. "And then?" she asked. "And then my wife got sick. 2 years after Cardinal Bridge, she got sick, and that became the only thing." He said it simply, without performance. "She passed when my daughter was 3. After that, I just disappeared. It was easier. For everybody. For everybody or for you? He didn't answer that immediately. Both, probably, he said. She looked at him for a moment longer than was professionally comfortable. Then she opened the file and slid one page across the table toward him, the page with her father's handwriting in the margin. He read it again. Your father, he said. He was connected to defense contracting, peripherally. The company had some government infrastructure work in the early years. I don't know what he knew. I don't know why he had this file. She pulled the page back. But he kept it, and he kept it separate from everything else. Ethan looked at her. Why are you telling me this? Because I think whatever happened 12 years ago isn't finished, she said. And I think whoever buried it has had a very long time to get comfortable with the idea that it's staying buried. She held his gaze. I want you heading my security operations, she said. Full authority. You build the team, you set the protocols, you run it your way. She paused. I'm not hiring the man you're pretending to be. I'm hiring the one I saw on that mat yesterday. Something moved across Ethan's face that he didn't try to manage. Not the practiced stillness. Something real, complicated, and slightly unwilling. I have a daughter, he said. I know. She's 12. She's got a science project due Thursday and a spider problem she won't deal with until I get home. Victoria blinked. A spider problem? She texts me updates. A silence opened up between them that was slightly different from the ones before it. Less tense, more human. I'm not asking you to go back to what you were, Victoria said. I'm asking you to do a job. A real job. The kind that matters. She folded her hands on the table. Whatever is sitting inside this company, and I think something is sitting inside this company, I need someone who can see it before it becomes a problem I can't manage. Ethan looked at the file, then at the window, then at his coffee cup. What's the salary? He asked. She told him. He was quiet for a moment. That's a lot. You stopped their unbeaten champion in 3 seconds wearing a jacket from a thrift store, she said. It's appropriate. He almost smiled. Not quite. Close enough. Okay, he said. He started the following Monday. He didn't make announcements. He didn't hold an all-staff introduction or circulate a memo about new security protocols. He arrived at 7 in the morning, collected the master access card Catherine had left for him at reception, and went to work. The first thing he did was walk the entire building. Not a tour, a mapping. He moved through every floor, every corridor, every stairwell and maintenance access point and server corridor and emergency exit. He noted which cameras had blind spots and which didn't. He noted where the foot traffic patterns created predictable congestion and where they created predictable isolation. He tested 3 emergency exits that the existing security report listed as functional and found that one of them had a warped frame that would slow evacuation by approximately 20 seconds in a real emergency. 20 seconds. He wrote it down and said nothing to anyone yet. On the second day, he started going through records. Sterling Global's security operation maintained what looked, on paper, like a clean and well-organized access log system. Every entry point, every restricted floor, every server room, all time-stamped, all credential verified, all cross-referenced against an employee database. Ethan sat in the security operations room on the 3rd floor with 2 monitors and a legal pad and spent 14 hours reading access logs. By the end of the 3rd day, he had 37 anomalies. Some were small. Credentials used at unusual hours by employees who had no documented reason to be in those locations. Some were technical. Access requests that had been partially logged and then somehow overwritten, leaving entries that didn't quite match between the 2 redundant systems that were supposed to mirror each other exactly. And some were larger. There was a pattern of executive-level credential use across 3 specific server room access points that occurred, consistently, on the 3rd Thursday of every month. Always between 11 at night and 1 in the morning. Always for durations of less than 7 minutes. He checked the duty rosters for those nights. Different personnel each time, different floor supervisors. The only constant was the credential, one executive access card that showed up in each of those 37 anomaly logs with a frequency that was statistically impossible to explain through coincidence. The card was registered to a man named Daniel Mercer, Senior Vice President of Infrastructure Development, 15 years with Sterling Global. 3 performance commendations. one of 7 executives who sat on the company's internal security advisory panel. Ethan wrote Mercer's name on the legal pad and underlined it twice. He didn't say anything to Victoria yet. He didn't have enough. And he had learned long ago that the most dangerous mistake you could make in a situation like this was moving too soon and alerting whatever you were trying to catch. Instead, he went home. His daughter's name was Lily, and she was 12 years old and deeply unimpressed by the spider situation, which she felt had been inadequately handled despite his removal of the spider 4 days prior. "There could be more," she said from across the dinner table. "There aren't more." "You don't know that. I know spiders are generally solitary." "Generally," she said, with the particular emphasis that 12-year-olds deploy when they feel a technicality has been identified. Ethan pushed a piece of chicken around his plate. "How's the science project?" "Done. I got a 94. "That's great." The other 6 points were about presentation formatting. Miss Delacroix is very particular about font size. She paused. "How was your first week at the new job?" He looked up. She was watching him with an expression that was half her mother's, that particular quality of attention that saw more than it was supposed to. "Fine," he said. "You're not going to tell me anything, are you?" "There's nothing to tell. I'm doing security work." "For that big company downtown, the one with the glass tower?" "Yes." She absorbed this. "Do you carry a gun?" "Not at the office." "But you could." "Lily, I'm just asking questions." "I know the kind of questions you're asking." She pulled at a thread on her sleeve, a gesture she'd had since she was 4, when she was thinking through something she hadn't decided to say yet. "Dad," she said, "are you okay?" He looked at her. She was 12 years old and she was watching him with her mother's eyes, and there was a specific weight to that combination that he had never learned to carry comfortably. "Yeah," he said. "I'm okay." She looked at him for another moment. "Okay," she said, in a tone that indicated she had noted his answer and reserved the right to revisit it. He did the dishes, she did her homework at the kitchen table. Outside, the neighborhood went through its Tuesday evening without anything dramatic happening. He had learned to be grateful for that. Uneventful evenings were not nothing, they were actually quite a lot. 2 weeks into the job, Ethan requested a private meeting with Victoria. He brought the legal pad. He did not bring the full documentation yet. He had made copies and stored them off-site, on a personal encrypted drive he kept at the apartment, because he had been in enough situations to know that evidence inside the building was evidence inside the reach of whoever he was building a case against. He laid the pattern out for her clearly, without editorializing. Victoria listened without interrupting. She had a quality he hadn't expected, a genuine ability to sit with information without immediately reaching for a reaction. She looked at the anomaly list. She looked at Mercer's name. "Mercer," she said. "He's on your internal security advisory panel. He's been with the company since before my father passed." She looked at the list again. "That's not a defense. I know that. It's relevant context." "What do you need?" "Time," he said, "and access to your communications infrastructure. I want to see if the pattern in the server room logs corresponds to anything in outbound data transfers. That requires IT cooperation." "I don't want IT cooperation. I want direct access, just me, without anyone in that department knowing it's happening." He looked at her. "Whoever is doing this has been doing it for a while. That means they're comfortable. Comfortable people make mistakes, but they also have habits, and one of those habits might be watching for exactly the kind of investigation I'm currently running." Victoria held his gaze. "You think it goes beyond Mercer?" "I think Mercer is probably a door," Ethan said. "I want to know what's on the other side of it before I open it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across her desk, wrote a 4-word authorization on her personal letterhead, signed it, and passed it to him. "That gets you into anything in this building," she said. "Use it carefully." He took the paper, started to stand. "Ethan," he stopped. "The spider situation resolved?" He looked at her. She's still suspicious. Victoria almost laughed. It was the first time he'd seen that. Something unguarded and genuine crossing her face before she had a chance to arrange it into something more appropriate for business. "She sounds like someone worth being careful for," Victoria said. He folded the authorization paper. "Yeah," he said. "She is." He left. Victoria sat at her desk for a moment after he was gone, looking at the door he had walked through. The feeling she'd been calling the itch had not gone away. If anything, it had sharpened in the 2 weeks since she'd hired Ethan, taken on a more specific quality, like static resolving into a signal. Something was wrong inside her company. Something had been wrong for a long time, long enough to become infrastructure, long enough to have its own architecture, and its own personnel, and its own calendar. Third Thursday of every month, 11 at night to 1 in the morning. She looked at her desk calendar. Next Thursday was 17 days away. She turned back to her work. Marcus Webb did not make it easy. He hadn't been dismissed. His position as head of the internal security team remained intact, his record technically unblemished despite the assessment mat incident, which had been logged simply as candidate evaluation, result, hire. But he had rearranged himself around Ethan's presence in the way that men rearrange themselves around things they don't accept but can't reject. Technically cooperative, visibly resistant, broadcasting contempt on a frequency just below what could be formally addressed. He did it in small ways. Reports submitted late. Briefings that somehow always had one piece of information missing that Ethan had specifically requested. A tendency to redirect junior staff questions away from Ethan's protocols and back toward the previous procedures without any explicit instruction to do so. Ethan noted all of it. He said nothing about it. What he did instead was work alongside Webb on the 3 areas where operational overlap was unavoidable: building-wide drills, shift scheduling, and the visitor credentials process. He was precise, consistent, and entirely unbothered by Webb's temperature. He corrected procedural gaps without pointing at their source. He asked questions that assumed competence and left the person answering them no option but to live up to that assumption. After the 3rd week, Webb showed up to a joint briefing with a report that was not only complete but included 2 additional access point recommendations that were, Ethan had to privately admit, genuinely useful. He incorporated them without comment. Webb sat across the table watching him do that, and something shifted slightly in the man's face. Not warmth, not yet. Something more like recalibration. "You're not what I expected," Webb said when the other staff had filed out. Ethan gathered his papers. "What did you expect? Some hotshot, coming in here to blow everything up and rebuild it with his name on it. That's not how security works. That's how ambition usually works." Ethan looked at him. "I'm not ambitious. I'm employed." He paused. "Your recommendations on the loading dock entry points were good. Put them in writing and I'll push them through." Webb watched him for a moment. "Why?" "Because they're good recommendations. Even from me. The recommendations don't care who made them." Webb didn't have an immediate answer for that. Ethan left the conference room and walked back down the hall toward the Security Operations Center, and behind him he heard Webb gather his own papers and leave through the other door. Small things. Incremental things. But Ethan had learned that trust between people who had started from hostility wasn't built in dramatic moments. It was built in the accumulated evidence of consistency, in being the same person on the bad days that you were on the easy ones, until the person watching finally ran out of reasons to disbelieve what they were seeing. He was patient. He could afford to be. What he was not was comfortable, because the access log anomalies were still there, and Mercer's credential kept appearing in places it had no legitimate business appearing, and somewhere in this building, in one of these offices with its corporate art, and its ergonomic furniture, and its carefully constructed professional surfaces, something was being fed out through the walls to somewhere it was never supposed to go. He felt it the way he had felt things in other environments. Not fear exactly, more like the particular quality of attention that comes from having spent time in places where missing something had permanent consequences. He went back to the logs. He kept reading. Outside the building, the city moved. Seasons changed in the incremental way of places that don't commit fully to any of them. Lily turned 13 and had a birthday party that involved 7 of her friends, a considerable amount of cake, and a movie Ethan sat through 3/4 of before falling asleep in the living room armchair. She took a photo of him sleeping and said nothing about it until breakfast the next morning, when she showed it to him with the specific expression of someone who has collected evidence and is choosing their moment. "Evidence of what?" he said. "That you're a normal dad," she said, "not whatever you think you're being." He looked at the photo. He did, objectively, look extremely normal, slightly rumpled, mouth not quite closed. "Delete that," he said. "No," she said pleasantly, and put her phone in her pocket. He almost said something else, but she was already refilling her orange juice, easy and unhurried, and the morning was quiet around them, and he thought, not for the first time, that she had somehow become the most grounded person in his life without either of them planning it that way. He drank his coffee. He thought about Mercer, about Third Thursdays, about a classified file with 2 words in blue pen in the margin. He thought about 3 men who hadn't made it out of a safe house in a mission that had been listed as closed for 12 years. Not closed, her father had written. No, Ethan thought, not closed at all. The third Thursday arrived with the particular indifference of calendar dates that don't know what they're carrying. Ethan was in position by 9:30, not in the Security Operations Center, not anywhere that would appear on a duty log. He was in a maintenance corridor on the 4th floor, sitting on an overturned utility bucket with a tablet running a custom monitoring script he had written himself, watching 3 camera feeds simultaneously on a split screen and drinking coffee from a thermos. Lily had given him 2 Christmases ago with the words "World's Okayest Dad" printed on the side. He had told no one he was doing this. Not Catherine, not Webb, not Victoria. He had come close to telling her, but something had held him back. Some instinct that said the less this specific night existed in anyone else's awareness, the better. He had simply put himself on the building schedule as a routine overnight security check and left it at that. At 11:14, Daniel Mercer's access credential appeared in the server room on sub-level 2. Ethan watched the feed. The server room camera was positioned high and at an angle. Well, not ideal, but workable. A figure in a dark jacket moved through the room with the confidence of someone who had been here before, which, given what Ethan now knew about the access logs, was accurate. The figure moved to a specific rack, connected a small device to a port, and stood back. 6 minutes and 43 seconds later, the device was disconnected and the figure was gone. Ethan noted the time. He noted the rack number. He sat still for another 40 minutes, watching the feeds, until the building settled back into its overnight routine. Then he went down to sub-level 2. The rack was a standard server housing unit, one of 60 in the room, part of Sterling Global's internal data infrastructure. What was not standard was what he found when he ran his own device across the port access points. A trace residue in the connection log that the system had been configured to auto-delete after 30 minutes, but had not quite finished deleting when he arrived. Partial data, fragments, but enough to tell him what kind of data was moving. He stood in the cold, humming quiet of the server room for a long moment. What was being extracted through that rack was not random. It was structured, filtered. Someone on the inside had been systematically pulling specific categories of information: contract architecture, security protocol updates, communication routing data, and moving it out through a channel that the company's standard monitoring systems had been deliberately configured not to flag. This was not corporate espionage for competitive advantage. The categories were too specific, too operationally narrow. This was someone feeding the security and logistics architecture of Sterling Global to an outside party that needed to understand exactly how the company protected itself and how it protected Victoria. He drove home at 2 in the morning and sat at his kitchen table with the encrypted drive and his notes spread out in front of him. The apartment was quiet. He could hear Lily sleeping down the hall. Not literally, but the quality of the silence was different when she was in the building. Fuller, somehow. He thought about Cardinal Bridge, but access codes and communication frequencies, and a safe house that had been hit with surgical precision by people who should not have known where it was. Same architecture, different building, 12 years later. He pulled out his phone and stared at Victoria's contact for a while. It was 2:15 in the morning. He put the phone back down. He would tell her tomorrow, with the full documentation, with everything organized clearly enough that she could understand the scope of it without him having to walk her through 12 years of history to get there. He went to bed at 3. He did not sleep particularly well. He told her the next morning. He had everything on a flash drive and a printed summary. 2 pages, clean, no editorializing. Victoria read it at her desk while he stood near the window. She read it twice, which he had noticed was her habit when something needed processing, rather than just information intake. When she looked up, her face was composed in the particular way that he now recognized as her version of controlled. "He's been on the security advisory panel the entire time," she said. "Yes. He would have had access to every protocol update, every infrastructure change I approved." "Yes." She set the pages down flat. "Who does the data go to?" I don't have that yet. The transfer chain has at least 2 intermediary steps. I need more time to trace it. How much time? A week. Maybe less if I can get into the external routing architecture. Victoria looked at the pages again. Ethan, if someone has been feeding them our security protocols, feeding them how we protect this building, how we protect me, that means whatever they're planning, they've already mapped the defense. That's the correct read, he said. She absorbed that without falling apart, which he appreciated. Some people, when they understood that the architecture protecting them had been compromised, simply stopped functioning for a period. Victoria did not stop functioning. She got very still and very precise, and her eyes went to a specific quality of focus that he had seen in exactly the kind of people who performed when it mattered. "What do we do?" she asked. "Nothing that looks like we know," he said. "Mercer needs to believe the pattern is still invisible. If he pulls back now, we lose the trail." He looked at her. "Can you do that? Sit across from him at board meetings and act like none of this exists?" She held his gaze without blinking. "I've been doing that with people for 5 years," she said. "It's called running a company." He nodded. "Okay. What do you need from me?" "Keep your schedule exactly as planned. Don't change any upcoming events. Don't give anyone on the advisory panel any indication that protocols are being reviewed." He paused. "And if anyone asks you to alter your planned movements in the next 3 weeks, you tell me immediately." "Before I do it?" "Instead of doing it," he said. He spent the following 10 days going deeper into the routing architecture, working in 3-hour windows between 2 and 5 in the morning, accessing external transfer logs through the authorization Victoria had signed, and a series of connection traces that required both patience and a level of technical fluency that his official personnel file gave no indication he possessed. He found the first intermediary on day 4. A shell company registered in Delaware, no employees, no physical address, existing only as a data routing entity that processed what appeared to be encrypted communications consulting traffic. He found the second on day 8, another layer, this one registered overseas with connection logs that traced backward to a private financial network that had appeared in 3 separate federal investigations over the past decade without ever quite becoming the subject of one. And on day 10, sitting in the maintenance corridor again at 3 in the morning with his thermos and the tablet, he found the name attached to the final routing destination. He sat with it for a while. The name was Garrison Holt, former defense contractor. Sterling Global board member for 6 years, departed the board 2 years before Victoria took over. His departure had been listed in company records as a voluntary resignation for personal reasons. Garrison Holt had also been, according to a document in her father's classified file that Ethan had now read 3 times, a financial backer of the defense network that Cardinal Bridge had been designed to expose 12 years ago. He photographed everything. He backed it up in 3 locations. Then he sat in the dark corridor for a long time, feeling the specific weight of a thing that has become too large to carry alone and not yet large enough to put down. He called Victoria at 6:15 in the morning. "It connects," he said when she picked up. "Cardinal Bridge, the whistleblower. What happened 12 years ago and what's happening now? It's the same network, Victoria. They never stopped. They just moved the operation." A silence on the line. "And my father's file," she said. It wasn't a question. "I think your father knew more than the file shows. I think he was building a case of his own and didn't get far enough." Another silence, longer this time. "His heart attack," she said quietly. "He was 61. The doctors said they said it was ordinary, that he'd been working too hard." Ethan said nothing. He didn't need to. "Okay," Victoria said. Her voice had settled into something that was neither calm nor its opposite, something functional and forward-facing that he recognized as the sound of a person deciding. "What's the next step?" "I'm going to need 3 more days to compile everything into a package that's legally bulletproof, something that can go to federal investigators without a gap they can exploit." He paused. "And we need to talk about how we make sure it gets there without being intercepted. Whoever is in that network has had 12 years to develop reach. We have to assume they have contacts in places that look like safe channels." "I have a contact," she said, "outside the normal chain, someone my father trusted who is not connected to any of this." "Give me the name." She did. He wrote it down. 3 days, he said. 3 days, she confirmed. And I made it too. The evacuation alarm triggered on a Wednesday at 11:47 in the morning during a full executive floor meeting that included Victoria, 6 senior executives, and a visiting delegation from a European logistics partner. The alarm was a fire alert, standard grade, triggered from a sensor on the 43rd floor, 2 floors above the executive level. The automated system kicked in exactly as designed. Floor wardens activated. Stairwell doors unlocked. The building's PA system issued the standard instruction sequence in a calm, recorded voice. Ethan was in the Security Operations Center when it hit. He looked at the sensor map on his primary monitor. The trigger point was a single sensor, isolated, with no corresponding heat signature, no secondary alarm from adjacent sensors, no sprinkler activation. A single triggered sensor in a building with fully redundant fire detection does not produce an isolated alert. It produces a cascade. There was no cascade. He was on his radio before the PA finished its first announcement cycle. This is Cross. All floor wardens hold positions. Do not initiate stairwell flow. Repeat, hold positions. The response came back confused because the protocol was clear and Ethan was countermanding it, and floor wardens were trained people but not trained for this specific variance. He switched channels. Victoria, stay on the executive floor. Do not move toward any exit yet. Confirm. A brief pause. Then her voice. Confirmed. I'm holding. He pulled up the stairwell cameras. What he saw in the next 11 seconds rearranged his understanding of how far this had gone. The primary stairwells, all 4 of them on the executive floors, had people in them, not employees. The body language was wrong, the positioning was wrong, and 2 of the figures visible on camera had earpieces that caught the light in the specific way of professional tactical communications gear rather than the consumer-grade equipment. Equipment Sterling Global's security team wore. 4 stairwells, 4 sets of figures, positioned at the landings, not moving upward with the evacuating flow, but stationary, waiting. Every standard evacuation route had someone waiting in it. He had 30 seconds before the floor warden on 43 overrode his hold order out of procedure compliance. He took the access card from his chest pocket and went through the Security Operations Center door at a pace that was not quite running because running drew attention, and he did not want attention yet. He went left, away from the main corridor, through a door that opened onto a service passage that most of the building's occupants didn't know existed because it wasn't on the standard floor plan. It was on the maintenance map he had memorized during his first week, the one he had produced by walking every square foot of the building while everyone else was focused on what the elevators could tell them. He reached the executive floor in 4 minutes through the service passage, which connected to a maintenance corridor that ran parallel to the main hallway and exited through a panel in the wall beside the IT storage room. Victoria was in the corridor outside the main boardroom. She had kept the European delegation in the room and told them it was a precaution. Her face showed the particular controlled composure of someone managing the space between knowing something is wrong and not yet having the full shape of it. She looked at him when he came through the panel. "The stairwells," he said quietly, close enough that only she could hear. "They're covered. This alarm was pulled to move you into a stairwell." He met her eyes. "This is not a drill." The color did not drain from her face. She just looked at him with that quality of focus. "How many?" "At least 4 positions. Probably more at ground level." He took her arm gently and moved her back toward the boardroom door. "I need to get you and these people out of this building through a route that isn't on any standard plan. You know one?" "I've known one since day 3, he said. She looked at him for a fraction of a second. "You were ready for this." "I was hoping to be wrong," he said. He wasn't. Not Tryout. The maintenance corridor system on the executive floors connected, through a series of access points that required specific override codes, to a secondary utility spine that ran vertically through the building alongside the main elevator shafts but serviced only mechanical and HVAC infrastructure. It was not on the public floor plan. It was not on the security operations floor map. It was on the original construction blueprint that Ethan had pulled from city building records during his second week, on his own time, using his own access. He moved Victoria and the 6 European delegation members through it in single file, himself at the front, his phone in his hand with the blueprint pulled up and the camera feeds running on a split screen. The corridor was narrow, exposed pipes overhead. the sound of the building's ventilation system running constant and loud enough to cover their movement. One of the delegation members, a heavy-set man in his 50s named Brecht, who had said very little during the morning's meeting, was breathing hard and sweating through his shirt. "We're fine," Ethan said quietly as he moved. "Stay close. Don't stop." "What is happening?" Brecht said. "We're taking a different exit." "Why?" "Because the regular ones aren't safe right now." That landed in the corridor and no one said anything further. They encountered the first problem on sub-level 1, where the maintenance corridor intersected with a utility access point that led to the loading dock, the exit Ethan had planned to use. The camera feed on his phone showed 2 figures at the loading dock who had not been there 20 minutes ago. He stopped the group, held up a hand. He looked at his phone, looked at the blueprint, ran the geometry of the building in his head, a calculation he had run in some form or another in more environments than he preferred to count. There was a secondary option, a service access point that exited into the underground parking structure through a mechanical room that was locked, but that his master access card would open. From there, a stairwell up to street level on the building's west side, which was not covered on the camera feeds he could currently see. The problem was getting to it required crossing approximately 40 feet of open utility corridor that connected to the main basement level, where the 2 figures at the loading dock had a sightline if they moved inside. 40 feet, open, 12 people. He looked back at the group. Victoria was watching him with the particular quality of someone who has decided to trust completely and is managing the cost of that decision in real time. "I need everyone to move when I say move and to not stop for any reason," he said. 40 feet. We move fast, we move quiet, we go." Brecht started to say something. Victoria put her hand on the man's arm, and whatever she communicated through that contact stopped him mid-breath. "Okay," she said to Ethan. He went first. He crossed the utility corridor without incident. The loading dock figures had not moved inside. He positioned himself at the corner, watching both directions, and signaled back. They came in pairs. Not perfectly. Brecht stumbled on a floor drain and made a sound that echoed in the concrete space. Ethan went very still, watching the loading dock camera feed on his phone. The 2 figures paused. One of them looked toward the interior corridor. Ethan did not move. The group behind him did not move. 8 seconds. The figures at the loading dock turned back toward the exterior. One of them said something into an earpiece. Ethan exhaled through his nose and moved the rest of the group through. The mechanical room was 20 feet further. He opened it with the MasterCard. Inside, HVAC equipment, pipe infrastructure, heat and noise. He pulled the group through, located the service stairwell on the west wall, and took them up 2 flights to street level. The west side exit opened onto a narrow service alley. Midday city. Ordinary noise. A delivery truck idling at the alley's far end. He got everyone into the alley and pressed his radio again. "Webb. What's your position?" Webb's voice came back immediately. "Lobby. Main floor. We have a situation. There are people in the building who didn't sign in. I've got 3 of my guys on the east side stairwell landings and nobody told them to be there." "I know. Get your team to the west alley. Now." A pause. "The west alley isn't in any evac plan." "That's the point," Ethan said. "Move." Webb got there in 4 minutes with 3 members of his floor security team. He came around the alley corner, assessed the group standing against the brick wall. 12 people. One of them, Victoria Sterling, all of them looking like they had recently been through something that hadn't made it into any briefing, and his face ran through a rapid sequence of calculations. "How did you—" he started. "Later," Ethan said. He looked at the 3 security team members behind Webb. "Do you trust these 3? Webb blinked. "Yes." "Personally. Not professionally." Webb looked at his team, back at Ethan. Something moved in his expression. The particular discomfort of a man who had never had to apply that level of distinction before and wasn't happy about having to apply it now. "Yes," he said again, steadier this time. "Good. I need them to get Victoria and these people to the secondary location. You know what that is?" Webb looked at Victoria. "The Hargrove Building, 14th floor, company emergency protocol." "Not there," Ethan said. "That protocol is in the security documentation. Use the Meridian." "The Meridian's a hotel." "It's a hotel where nobody who works in this building has any documented reason to be. Get them there. Get them into a suite under a name that isn't connected to anything Sterling. Pay cash for incidentals. He reached into his jacket pocket, produced an envelope he had prepared 3 days ago without knowing when he would need it, and handed it to Webb. Webb took it. Didn't look inside. And you? I'm going back in. A silence. You're going back in, Webb repeated. There are still employees in that building who don't know what's happening. The floor wardens are getting conflicting instructions. Someone needs to manage the real evacuation while your team manages this one. Victoria stepped forward. Ethan, you need to go with Webb, he said. He looked at her. You know the signal? They had established it 3 days ago, during a conversation that had started as an operational briefing and drifted briefly into something more personal before they had both, without discussion, brought it back to professional. A prearranged signal, a specific phrase he would use if everything was clear, and a different specific phrase if it wasn't. I know it, she said. Then go. She held his gaze for a moment, long enough that Webb looked away and then back again. 3 seconds, she said quietly. It was not one of the signal phrases, it was something else, a reference, a callback, a shorthand for something that had started on a sparring mat and had, without either of them fully charting its progress, become the framework of an unlikely and necessary trust. He nodded once. Then he turned and went back through the service door. Inside the building, the situation had degraded in the 11 minutes he had been in the alley. The evacuation alarm was still running. 2 of the floor wardens had initiated partial stairwell flow, moving employees toward the landings, where the position figures were waiting. Ethan came through the service entrance on sub-level 1, assessed the stairwell camera feeds on his phone, and made a series of fast decisions. He could not address all 4 stairwell positions simultaneously. He had no backup. What he had was the building's alarm infrastructure, his master access card, and the knowledge, acquired during those 14 hours reading access logs in the first week, that Sterling Global's emergency system had a manual override panel on sub-level 2 that could selectively lock individual stairwell doors from below. He went to sub-level 2. He found the panel. He locked the primary stairwells on floors 38 through 45, the executive zone, which would redirect any employee flow toward the secondary stairwells on the building's north side, away from where the position figures were waiting, and would simultaneously trap those figures on the landings they were occupying with no quick access upward or downward. It wouldn't hold them long. 10 minutes, maybe 15, before they found the override. He used 8 of those minutes to move through the 40th floor and clear the remaining employees who had not yet evacuated. 3 who had sheltered in place in a server management office. 2 more in a supply room near the east stairwell, 1 administrative assistant named Carol, who had locked herself in a bathroom and was responding to his knock with complete and understandable silence until he identified himself by name, and she apparently recognized his voice from 3 weeks of passing in the corridor. "Is it real?" she asked through the door. "The fire alarm isn't. The situation is. Come with me." She came. He got all 6 of them to the north stairwells and into the flow of the building's regular evacuation, which was proceeding in the confused but functional way that evacuations proceed when the people in charge are doing their best with incomplete information. He handed them off to a floor warden who knew him, gave that warden a specific set of instructions, and turned back toward the executive floor. He needed the evidence drive. He had stored a backup copy off-site, yes, but the primary drive, the one with the complete uncompressed data package, the one he had been building for 2 weeks, was locked in the Security Operations Center, and if whoever had orchestrated this was planning to use the building's chaos to access that room, he needed to get there first. He made it to the Security Operations Center in 3 minutes. The door was intact, the lock was intact, and the drive was where he had left it. He was heading back toward the service corridor when the door at the end of the hallway opened. 2 men came through it. They were in the generic business attire of people who wanted to look like they belonged in an office building without being specifically identifiable as any role within one. They moved with a coordinated, practiced efficiency that communicated training without advertising it. They saw him. He saw them. The hallway was 40 feet long and 8 feet wide, with no doors between his position and theirs except a supply closet on the left side at roughly the midpoint. The first man reached toward his jacket. Ethan was already moving. What happened in the next 22 seconds was not clean, and it was not graceful, and his left forearm took a hit against the edge of a wall mount that split the skin over the old scar tissue and made his hand go briefly numb. He put the first man down with a controlled sequence that prioritized immobilization over impact, not out of mercy exactly, but out of a long-standing operational habit of not creating consequences he didn't need. The second man was faster than he expected and got a hand on Ethan's jacket and used it, pulling instead of pushing, which was the smarter move and nearly worked. Nearly. He put the second man against the wall with enough force to end the engagement without ending the man, which was a narrower margin than he would have preferred. Both men were down. Neither was badly hurt. He zip-tied their hands with the restraints he kept in his jacket pocket, a habit Lily had once noticed and asked about, and he had explained as just in case, which she had accepted with the knowing skepticism of someone who understood that just in case was doing a lot of work in that sentence. He called Webb. Status. Everyone's at the Meridian. Victoria's secure. What's happening in there? Being managed, Ethan said. His forearm was bleeding into his sleeve. Get law enforcement to the building. Not the first number in the protocol. Call Detective Reyes at the city's Financial Crimes Division. That number is in the emergency contacts binder under my name. Tell him Ethan Cross called it in and that the Garrison Holt file is ready. A pause. Garrison Holt. Got it. Another pause. Are you okay? Yes, Ethan said. His arm disagreed mildly. Get Reyes. He hung up and leaned against the corridor wall for a moment. The building's alarm was still running, filling the air with its patient mechanical urgency. Somewhere below, the real evacuation was completing. Somewhere above, the figures locked in the stairwells were working toward an override. He had time. Not much. He looked down at the two men on the floor. The nearest one was watching him with an expression that combined professional wariness with something that was almost curiosity. You're Cross, the man said. Not a question. We were told you weren't a problem. Ethan looked at him for a moment. Who told you that? The man looked at the floor. Ethan straightened. That's what I thought. He took the evidence drive from his jacket pocket and looked at it. Small, matte black, containing 12 years of unfinished business compressed into 72 gigabytes. He had built this case in the early mornings, in the spare hours between a job and a life, between a daughter asking about spiders and an access log that kept telling him the same story in slightly different handwriting each time. He had built it the way he had learned to build things after everything fell apart, carefully, without announcing it, one piece at a time, without the certainty that it would ever hold. It was holding now. He walked to the service corridor and pulled the door shut behind him. That was when he heard the announcement over the building PA. Not the automated fire alarm sequence, but a live voice, patched through by someone with administrative access to the PA system, reading a prepared statement in the calm, certain tone of someone who believes they have already won. The voice belonged to Daniel Mercer. And what it said, in clear and detailed terms that echoed through every floor of Sterling Global's headquarters, was that evidence had been discovered implicating the company's head of security, Ethan Cross, as the architect of a coordinated scheme to destabilize Sterling Global's operations, compromise its executive protection, and position himself to leverage a hostile takeover of the company's classified contract holdings. It named specific evidence. An office search that morning had allegedly recovered encrypted communications, falsified security logs, and financial transfer records linking Ethan to an outside syndicate. It named a bank account. It gave a number. It was thorough. It was also entirely fabricated, which Ethan knew, but which the several hundred employees currently evacuating the building through the north stairwells did not know, and which the first law enforcement responders who arrived in the lobby in the next 14 minutes would not yet know either. He came out of the service corridor into the lobby precisely as 4 officers came through the main entrance. They looked at him. He looked at them. His left forearm was bleeding through his sleeve. His jacket was torn at the shoulder. He was holding a small black drive in his right hand. Behind him, the PA system was finishing Mercer's statement with the precise, patient cadence of a prepared script. Ethan Cross, the lead officer said. He looked at the officer, at the drive in his hand, at the lobby around him, polished surfaces, emergency lighting still cycling, the last of the evacuees moving past in uncertain clusters. Yes, he said. Sir, I need you to come with us. He looked at the drive one more time. Then he looked up. Somewhere across the city, in a hotel suite, Victoria Sterling was sitting with Webb and a group of confused European logistics professionals, watching her phone, waiting for a signal phrase that had not come yet. He thought about the signal. He thought about what it would mean to use it now versus what it would mean to protect the chain of evidence by going through the process correctly, by letting whatever was about to happen in a way that didn't give anyone a procedural argument for throwing out everything he had built. He handed the drive to the lead officer. "Chain of custody starts now," he said. "That drive needs to go to Detective Reyes at Financial Crimes. Nobody else handles it first. I need that logged." The officer blinked. "Sir, I understand I'm being detained. I'm cooperating fully. I just need that logged." He looked at the man steadily. "Please." The officer looked at the drive, at Ethan. Something in his expression shifted fractionally. Not belief, not yet, but the specific quality of uncertainty that comes from a situation not matching its announced shape. He logged it. They walked Ethan Cross out of Sterling Global's headquarters in front of the remaining employees and the arriving press and the building's security cameras and the cold midday light that had no opinion about any of it. Behind him, the PA system had gone silent. Somewhere on sub-level 2, in a server room with 60 equipment racks and one that mattered, the trace of 12 years of careful, patient corruption sat in a log file waiting to be read by someone with the authority and the will to read it. And in a hotel 14 blocks north, a woman who had grown up learning to manage what she felt before she let it show, looked at her phone and understood, from the absence of the signal phrase, exactly what had just happened. She did not fall apart. She sat very still. She started making calls. The holding room at the downtown precinct was the kind of space designed to communicate a specific message through its dimensions alone. Small enough to feel deliberate, with a table bolted to the floor and 2 chairs that didn't quite match, and a fluorescent light that cycled through a faint flicker every 40 seconds with the patience of something that had learned to outlast everyone who sat beneath it. Ethan sat in one of the chairs with his left forearm wrapped in a bandage a duty officer had provided without being asked, which he had taken as a moderately good sign about the next few hours. His jacket was folded on the table in front of him. His hands were flat on the surface, and he was not looking at the door or the ceiling or the flickering light. He was looking at his own hands, thinking about Lily. She would be in school. She wouldn't know anything yet. He had a contingency for this. A woman named Rosa, who lived 2 floors below them and had a key and Lily's complete trust, and who Ethan had briefed 3 weeks ago in the same low-key, matter-of-fact way he briefed everything, explaining that his new job involved some complexity, and that if she ever got a call from a specific number, she should go upstairs and stay with Lily until he got back. He had given Rosa the number. He had not told her what kind of complexity he was anticipating. He thought about calling Rosa now. But his phone had been collected at intake, and he was being held pending investigation, and the first 48 hours of a procedural situation like this one were about patience, in the same way that field operations were about patience. Not the passive kind, but the active kind, the kind where you watch, and you calculate, and you wait for the moment that has your name on it, rather than reaching for a moment that doesn't. He trusted Victoria. That was the thing he landed on, sitting in that room with the flickering light. He trusted her in the specific way you trust someone who has shown you their actual self rather than their professional performance. Not because she was perfect, or because she hadn't made the calculation that hiring him served her interests, but because she had sat across from him in that conference room with her father's file between them and been honest about what she didn't know. And in his experience, that particular variety of honesty was the rarest and most reliable kind. She was making calls. He knew she was making calls. He just had to wait. Detective Reyes arrived at the holding room at 4:17 in the afternoon. He was a compact man in his mid-50s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the specific quality of tiredness that comes not from a single long day, but from 20 years of long days accumulated into a permanent condition. He set a folder on the table, sat down across from Ethan, and looked at him for a moment without opening it. "Ethan Cross," he said. "Yes." "You told the arresting officer to route the evidence drive to me specifically." "Yes." Reyes looked at the folder. "My name was in a contact binder maintained by the head of security at Sterling Global, which was you." He looked back up. "How did my name get in that binder?" "Victoria Sterling gave it to me. She said you were someone her father trusted." A pause. Something moved in Reyes's expression. Not surprise exactly, more like confirmation of something he had already half suspected. "Richard Sterling," he said. Yes. Reyes took the reading glasses off his forehead, looked at them briefly, put them back. Richard Sterling called me 8 years ago. He said he had a situation he was trying to understand and that he needed someone outside the usual channels. We had 3 conversations. Then he had a heart attack, and I never heard from it again. He paused. I always thought that timing was strange. It wasn't coincidental, Ethan said. Reyes held his gaze for a moment. Then he opened the folder. Inside was a printed summary, 2 pages, the same format Ethan had prepared for Victoria. Someone had already gotten it to him, which meant Victoria's calls had reached the right places faster than he'd estimated, which meant she was better at this than even he had understood. He watched Reyes read. The detective's face showed nothing while he read, which Ethan took as a professional positive. Garrison Holt, Reyes said, without looking up. Yes. Holt's been clean for 11 years, formally. Nothing actionable. The drive has 72 gigabytes of not clean, Ethan said. Reyes turned a page. The false evidence they planted in your office is false. Whatever documentation they produced showing financial transfers or encrypted communications connected to me, it was assembled in the 48-hour window before the evacuation. I can demonstrate the fabrication through the metadata. How? Because I built a shadow log of my own activity across the company's infrastructure from day one, timestamp verified, third-party encrypted, stored off-site. Whatever they manufactured won't match the actual record. He looked at Reyes. I anticipated this. Reyes set the papers down. You anticipated being framed. I anticipated that whoever was running the operation inside Sterling Global would eventually realize I was a problem. What you do when someone is a problem and you've had 12 years to learn how to operate without consequences is you remove them using the system. Fabricated evidence, formal accusation. It's cleaner than the other option and leaves less exposure. And less clean than that would have been, yes, Ethan said. Reyes absorbed this. Cardinal Bridge, he said. That's 12 years old, federal jurisdiction. That's not my case to open. I know, but the financial transfer network connecting Holt to the current Sterling Global infiltration, that falls under your division's mandate. Financial crimes, cross-state, that's your door. Ethan looked at him. Open your door. The federal cases open themselves from what's inside it. Reyes looked at him for a long moment. The fluorescent light did its 40-second flicker. Outside, through the closed door, the ordinary noise of a working precinct moved through its afternoon. You're going to be here overnight, Reyes said. The process has a minimum timeline, and I can't compress it without creating procedural vulnerabilities that Holt's attorneys will eat alive. I know. Is there anyone? There's one who can stay with my daughter. He paused. Can I make one call? Reyes pushed his phone across the table without comment. Rosa answered on the second ring. Ethan told her it would be overnight and possibly one additional day, and that he was fine, and that Lily should not be told anything specific until he could tell her himself. Rosa said she understood, in the tone of a woman who had understood more than people gave her credit for her entire life, and had developed a philosophical patience about this fact. One more thing, he said. Yes? There might be something in the news tonight, about me, about where I work. A pause. The Sterling building. Yes. I saw it on my phone an hour ago, she said. Something about an evacuation and someone being arrested. He closed his eyes briefly. It's going to look a specific way. Ethan, Rosa said, with the patient directness of someone who had known him for 4 years and watched him bring his daughter home from school with scraped knees and science project materials, and once, a very confused-looking turtle that Lily had found near the park and briefly attempted to adopt. I know who you are. Go do what you need to do. He handed Reyes his phone back. Reyes was watching him with the particular expression of a man resorting a situation according to new information. You've been planning this for a while, he said. Since day 3, Ethan said. Day 3 of the job. Yes. Reyes was quiet for a moment. That's either very good instincts or a very specific kind of paranoia. In my experience, Ethan said, after a certain point, they're the same thing. What happened in the next 18 hours happened in the specific institutional way of things that move through bureaucratic channels, slowly in some places, quickly in others, with the uneven rhythm of a process that has its own logic and doesn't particularly care about the urgency of the people inside it. Reyes spent 6 of those hours with the evidence drive. He brought in a forensic analyst and a second detective whose name Ethan didn't know, and they worked through the night in a way that the arresting officers occasionally referenced with the specific mixture of respect and irritation that one department shows another when that other department has suddenly become the most important room in the building. Victoria's attorneys arrived at the precinct at 9 in the evening and spent 2 hours establishing the legal framework for what came next. The lead attorney was a woman named Hargrove, no relation to the Hargrove building, apparently, though the coincidence was noted, who spoke to the duty sergeant with the calm precision of someone who had never raised her voice in a professional context because she had never needed to. Ethan was not released that night. He had expected this. What he had not expected was the note. It was passed to him at 11:15 by the duty officer, handwritten, on hotel stationery, which told him exactly where it had come from before he read the words. It said, "The spider situation has been managed. Lily knows you're working late on something important. She says," and I quote, "Rosa." And underneath that, in different handwriting, smaller, slightly uneven, in the particular way of someone who is composing while anxious and trying not to show it, 3 seconds, V. He folded the note and put it in his jacket pocket. He sat back in the chair. The fluorescent light flickered. He had stopped noticing it sometime around hour 4. He thought about the 3 men who hadn't come out of the safe house 12 years ago. He thought about them the way he always thought about them. Not as a wound exactly, because wounds heal, but as a specific permanent weight that you learn to carry until carrying it becomes part of how you move through the world. Their names were Castillo, Park, and Devereaux. He had said their names to himself on every significant day since Cardinal Bridge, not as ritual, just as acknowledgement. The simple act of not letting them go entirely to silence. He said their names now, quietly, in the empty room. Then he closed his eyes and waited for morning. The annual shareholders' gala had been scheduled for 8 weeks. It was the kind of event that Sterling Global's corporate calendar treated as a fixed star, immovable, extensively planned, carrying enough institutional and investor significance that canceling it would itself become a news story. Victoria did not cancel it. She had spent the 18 hours of Ethan's detention in a hotel suite making calls, meeting with attorneys, reviewing everything Reyes's team sent her through Hargrove, and sleeping for approximately 2 hours in a chair because the bed felt too deliberate given the circumstances. Webb had stationed 2 of his most trusted people outside the suite door and spent much of the night on his phone managing the building situation with the focused, slightly grim competence of someone who had stopped underestimating the scope of things and was now working with the actual dimensions. In the morning, he knocked on the suite door and she opened it and looked at him, and he said, "Reyes called. They're expanding the inquiry. Holt's financial network is large enough that the feds are getting involved. How long before they move on Holt directly?" Reyes said it depends on what else they find. Could be days. Could be a week. Webb paused. Mercer? Mercer is currently cooperating with investigators. Voluntarily. She said it with the specific flatness of someone who has identified the exact mechanism of a betrayal and does not intend to process it emotionally until later. That's something, at least. Mercer cooperating means Mercer is trying to minimize exposure. It means he knows the case is real and he's trying to position himself before it fully closes. She walked to the window. It does not mean Holt will cooperate. Holt has had 12 years to build walls. Reyes's team has the drive. The drive proves that the network exists and proves the Sterling Global infiltration. It doesn't prove Cardinal Bridge. That's a different case. She turned from the window. We go ahead with the gala. Webb blinked. The gala. It's been on the calendar for 8 weeks. Holt has been invited. He confirmed his attendance 6 weeks ago. She looked at Webb steadily. If we cancel, he knows we're moving against him. If we don't cancel, he thinks the situation is still in his favor. Is it still in his favor? No, she said, but I need him to believe it is for 36 more hours. Webb looked at her for a long moment. In the space of 6 weeks, his understanding of what Victoria Sterling actually was had undergone a fairly significant revision. He had known she was smart. He had not understood until recently the specific quality of that intelligence. Not academic, not strategic in the way of business school case studies, but something more practical and more cold. The kind of intelligence that functions best when the circumstances are worst. "What do you need?" he said. "I need Ethan out of that holding room by this afternoon." Reyes? Reyes will release him. The false evidence doesn't hold and they both know it. I need it to happen before 6 o'clock. She picked up her phone. "And I need you to personally manage the gala's security setup. Not the contracted team. You, with the people you actually trust. Using the new protocols, not anything in the documented system." Mercer had access to the documented system. Exactly. Ethan walked out of the precinct at 4:41 in the afternoon into the kind of thin autumn light that doesn't commit to warmth but tries. His jacket was back on. His forearm was sore under the bandage. He had not eaten anything since the previous morning except a vending machine granola bar that the duty officer had produced at 6 a.m. with the resigned generosity of someone who has worked night shifts long enough to understand that hunger is not a moral failing. Webb was parked at the curb in a dark sedan. Ethan got in. Webb pulled away without comment, which Ethan appreciated. They drove for 2 blocks before Webb said, "She's going ahead with the gala." "I know," Ethan said. "You know. It's the right call. Holt cancels if we cancel. He needs to believe he's still in the position of advantage." "Is he?" Ethan looked out the window. "He was, until they arrested me." "Because arresting you was the move of someone who thinks removing the head of security removes the security problem. It doesn't. It just changes the architecture." He paused. "The drive is with Reyes. The metadata on the fabricated evidence confirms the fabrication. And Victoria knows everything I know, which means she's the operational problem now," Webb said. "Not you." "She always was. I was just the person who could see it from the outside." He looked at the city going past. "How long have you been running her real security detail? Since the hotel?" Webb glanced at him. "Since about 40 minutes after I got her to the Meridian, and she looked at me and said, quote, 'I need you to operate as if the documented protocols don't exist.'" He paused. "It was a little clarifying." "She has that quality," Ethan said. "She told me about your military background. The full version." Webb's voice had changed slightly. "I didn't know. Most people don't. I was a jerk to you." "You were doing your job," Ethan said, "and then you did it better." He looked at Webb. "The recommendations on the loading dock access points. I put them in writing and submitted them before all this started. They're in the system under your name." Webb was quiet for a moment. "You didn't have to do that." "They were good recommendations," Ethan said simply. They drove the rest of the way in a silence that had changed its character from the silences of their earlier weeks. Less guarded, more like the specific quiet of 2 people who have been through something together and don't need to narrate it. The gala was held in Sterling Global's headquarters, the same building that had been an evacuation site 36 hours earlier, now restored to its corporate grandeur with the efficiency of an organization that understood that visible disruption was its own kind of damage. Caterers, lighting, a string quartet in the atrium. 400 invited guests, including board members, major shareholders, government officials, and 12 representatives from the European Logistics Partnership, whose members had spent an unexpected afternoon in a maintenance corridor and had, per their spokesperson, characterized the experience as memorable. Ethan was not on the guest list. He was on the 43rd floor in a room that existed in no gala itinerary, wearing the same jacket. He had, at this point, committed to the jacket as a kind of personal policy, watching 8 camera feeds on a tablet while Webb managed the visible floor operation below. Victoria was at the event. She was in a midnight blue dress, and her hair was up, and she was doing what she had told him she could do, sitting across from people who had helped orchestrate 12 years of corruption and conducting herself with the composed, gracious attention of a host who had nothing on her mind but her guest's experience. Garrison Holt arrived at 7:43. He was 71 years old and moved through the room with the specific ease of a man who had spent decades being the largest presence in every space he entered. Not loud, not aggressive, but weighted, the way objects with significant mass are weighted. He had silver hair and a dark suit and the handshake of someone who had learned long ago that a handshake communicates more than words. He greeted Victoria with warmth. She returned it with equal warmth. Ethan watched this on the feed and felt something cold and focused settle behind his sternum. He had been tracking Holt's network for 3 days in the precinct waiting room, using the legal pad the duty officer had eventually provided, working from memory of the data he had committed to retention. He knew the network structure now well enough to navigate it. He knew which nodes connected to which relationships were financial and which were operational, which members of that structure were in this building tonight and which were not. There were four. Holt, two board-adjacent financial figures whose names had appeared in the routing architecture, and a third man Ethan had not identified until Webb had sent him a photo taken from the lobby camera at 7:15. The third man was using a name Ethan didn't recognize, but his face was 12 years old in Ethan's memory, preserved with the specific clarity of the faces of people who have tried to kill you. His name had been Kowalski then. He had been a mid-level handler in the contractor network that Cardinal Bridge had targeted. He had been the person, Ethan had concluded from the partial Cardinal Bridge documentation, who had sold the safe house location. He was currently standing near the South Bar with a drink in his hand, wearing a name tag that said Gerald Foster, Infrastructure Consulting. Ethan sent the photo to Reyes with 3 words. "He's here. Kowalski." Reyes responded in 4 minutes. "Teams are staged outside. Give us the signal." He texted back. "Not yet. At 9:15, the building lost power. Not gradually, not floor by floor. Completely, instantly. The way power fails when someone who understands the system has decided it should fail." The emergency lighting kicked in after 4 seconds, which were the longest 4 seconds of most of the guests' evening, filling the atrium with the flat, institutional glow of backup systems. The string quartet stopped. The room went to the specific noise of 400 people simultaneously processing an unexpected darkness. Not panic, not yet, but the precursor to it. The shifting, questioning murmur of a crowd that hasn't decided what this is yet. Ethan was already moving. He had known the power would go. He had not known exactly when. He had known that the building's emergency power architecture was one of the documented protocol elements that Mercer had been feeding out for 18 months, and that whoever was running tonight's operation would use that knowledge at the moment of maximum audience. He took the service stairwell down from 43, moving fast, not running but close, counting floors in the partial dark. In the atrium, something was happening with the screens. Sterling Global's headquarters had a presentation infrastructure, large display panels integrated into the atrium walls, used for shareholder presentations and quarterly results and the kind of corporate communication that required scale. They had come back online on the emergency power, which they shouldn't have, which meant someone had specifically modified the emergency power routing to ensure they would. On the screens, documents, scrolling, financial records, communication logs, internal memos. The fabricated evidence, the same package that had been used to have Ethan arrested, displayed now in public, in front of 400 shareholders and board members and government officials, rendered in large format with the authority of official documentation. Ethan's name, his photograph. Transactions that had never happened connected to accounts that had never been his. He heard it from the stairwell, the change in the room's sound, the specific quality of a crowd absorbing something that has just been presented as fact. He came through the atrium door at the north end and scanned the room in 3 seconds. Victoria was at the center of the atrium, near the main presentation podium. She wasn't looking at the screens. She was looking at Garrison Holt, who stood 12 feet away with a drink in his hand and an expression of concerned gravity that was constructed with the precision of someone who had been practicing it for decades. Beside Holt, a man in a dark jacket had moved to Victoria's immediate right. Not a guest. His positioning was operational, cutting off her movement toward the main exit while leaving the appearance of proximity rather than restraint. The fake federal agents. He had read this in Reyes's briefing notes, a pattern from Holt's network, used twice in previous operations. Men with federal credentials that would survive a cursory check for 20 minutes, long enough to create a window of procedural confusion during which a target could be maneuvered into a position of apparent compliance. There were 3 of them visible, probably a 4th on the exterior. He looked at Victoria across the atrium. She was looking at him. The distance between them was 40 feet of marble floor and 400 confused shareholders and 12 years of unfinished business. He held her gaze. He set it at a normal conversational volume, which in the ambient noise of a disrupted atrium should have been inaudible at 40 feet, but she had been waiting for it and she knew his voice and she was watching his mouth. 3 seconds, he said. Everything changed. Victoria turned to this presentation podium with the specific speed of someone moving before the moment closes, and she put her hand on the podium's integrated control panel, the presenter override, which gave the person at the podium direct control of the display system. And she plugged in a drive that she had been carrying in the hidden pocket of the midnight blue dress for 3 hours. Her own documentation, not the fabricated evidence, the real one. The screens cleared. What replaced the fabricated documentation was a different set of records entirely, clean, sourced, cross-referenced, the same financial transfer architecture that Ethan had built from the server room logs, reformatted for public display by Hargrove's team in the 48 hours preceding the gala. Garrison Holt's name appeared in 12 separate transaction chains. The shell companies, the routing architecture, the connection to Cardinal Bridge, summarized in 3 pages that had been compiled from Ethan's documentation, and the federal records that Reyes's expansion of the inquiry had begun to unlock. The room's sound changed again. It was a different change this time. The man in the dark jacket beside Victoria reached for her arm. He didn't reach it. Webb came from the left, and the specific economy of what happened next was something that the guests nearest to it would later describe in fractured, incomplete terms. The sense of a situation resolving itself very quickly and in a direction nobody had anticipated. Webb put the man down cleanly, not perfectly. He took an elbow to the jaw that snapped his head sideways and would leave a bruise for 2 weeks, but cleanly. The man was on the floor, and Webb's knee was on his back, and Webb was breathing hard and looking at his own hands with an expression of mild surprise. "Huh," Webb said. The second and third fake federal agents reached for their credentials, which was the wrong move in a room where 400 people were now watching every surface simultaneously. Ethan was already between Holt and the atrium's east exit. Holt looked at him. Up close, the gravity of the man was different. It was still present, that weight, that sense of accumulated consequence, but it had shifted into something else. The composure was still there because it had been maintained through too many decades to dissolve quickly, but underneath it, something else was moving. "Mr. Cross," Holt said. His voice was steady. His drink was still in his hand. "You should be in a holding room." "I was," Ethan said. "Evidence didn't hold." "Evidence has a way of being interpreted. So does 12 years of financial transfer records." Ethan looked at him. Not with anger. That had burned itself out sometime around year 3 of raising Lily, alone in an apartment in Ohio. What was there now was something quieter and more durable, the specific clarity of a thing that has been waiting a long time to be seen. Castillo, Park, Devereaux. Something moved in Holt's face. "Those were the names of the men who didn't come out of Cardinal Bridge," Ethan said. "I say their names every significant day. Today is a significant day." Holt said nothing. His drink hand was not quite steady. "The building," Ethan said. "You cut the power to isolate her and create a window. What you didn't account for is that the emergency backup system for the 4th sub-level data infrastructure runs on a separate circuit that wasn't in the documentation you had access to." He paused. "I added that circuit in week 2. It wasn't in any report." Holt looked at him. "Every audio recording made inside this building tonight has been transmitted to a secure external server since the power went down," Ethan said. "Every conversation in this room. Everything your people said to each other during the setup. Everything you said to Victoria Sterling when you greeted her at 7:43. He watched the calculation happen behind the older man's eyes. The rapid, precise assessment of a man who had survived a long time by knowing exactly when a position was untenable. "The exits are covered," Ethan said quietly. "Not by my people. By Detective Reyes, who has been waiting outside for 45 minutes for a signal." Holt looked at the atrium, at the screen still displaying the financial architecture, at the 400 shareholders watching with the collective attention of people who are witnessing something that will be more significant in retrospect than they can currently process. At Webb on the floor with the fake federal agent, at Victoria at the podium, at Ethan. "The signal," Holt said. His voice was very even. "What's the signal?" Ethan looked at him for a moment. Then he looked past him, across the atrium, to where Victoria was watching from the podium, with her hand still on the control panel and the screens behind her showing 12 years of evidence that had survived every attempt to bury it. She gave him a small nod. He turned back to Holt. He took out his phone and sent one word to Reyes: "Now." The atrium doors opened, It was not dramatic in the way that things are dramatic in the versions of events that get simplified later. It was procedural and loud and involved several simultaneous conversations and a significant amount of confused movement among guests who had not yet understood where to position themselves in a room that had stopped being a gala approximately 20 minutes ago. Holt did not run. He did not shout. He handed his drink to the nearest table with the careful deliberateness of a man who has decided that dignity is the last thing available to him and is going to preserve it until he can't. Foster was located near the south bar. It took Reyes's people 90 seconds to match the face to the file and another 30 seconds to establish that Gerald Foster's federal credentials were manufactured with the same network Holt had used twice before. He said nothing when they let him out. He looked at Ethan once, from across the room, with an expression that was not quite recognition and not quite its absence. Ethan looked back. 12 years. Years, a safe house, 3 names. He held the look for exactly as long as it lasted. Then he looked away. The atrium took a long time to settle. These things always do. The official processing, the witness statements, the herding of 400 people through a situation that none of them had been briefed for. Reyes worked the room with the methodical efficiency of his permanent tiredness, moving from cluster to cluster, logging, directing, occasionally looking across at Ethan with the expression of a man filing away a very specific case study. Ethan stood near the north wall and let the room happen around him. He was aware, in the particular way of being aware of things you are not looking at directly, that Victoria was across the atrium. She had been speaking with Hargrove for 20 minutes. Then with a federal agent whose appearance indicated that the Cardinal Bridge inquiry had formally opened at some point in the last few hours without anyone announcing it. Then she had been standing alone near the podium, looking at the screens, which had gone to the company's standard standby display. She crossed the atrium toward him. She was still in the midnight blue dress. Her hair had come slightly loose on one side. She had been holding herself at formal posture for 6 hours in a room where everything had been designed to test that posture. And now that the formal part was finished, she moved with a slight change. Not collapse, nothing like that, just a millimeter of ease returning to her shoulders. She stopped beside him. They both looked out at the room. "The circuit," she said. "The separate emergency circuit in the 4th sublevel." "Yes." "You added that in week 2." "Yes." "You didn't put it in any report." "No." She was quiet for a moment. "You were planning for tonight." "I was planning for something like tonight," he said. "I didn't know it would be the gala specifically." "But you knew there would be a night." "I've always known there would be a night." He looked at the atrium, the controlled chaos of it, the official machinery of accountability doing its slow, imperfect work. The question was always whether we'd be ready for it before it arrived. She looked at him. Her expression had the quality it sometimes had in their private meetings. Not the controlled composure of the professional surface, but something underneath it, genuine and slightly tired and not particularly interested in managing itself for appearance right now. "Were we?" she asked. He thought about the answer honestly. About Webb with an elbow to the jaw looking at his own hands with surprised competence. About Lily and her science project, and her 13-candle birthday cake, and the spider she still considered inadequately handled. About an envelope passed through a holding room on hotel stationery. About 3 names he said on significant days. "Yes," he said. Victoria looked at the room for another moment. Then she said quietly, without looking at him, "I knew what Mercer was going to say on that PA. I knew they were going to accuse you, and I couldn't. I was in the hotel, and I couldn't move, and I couldn't help, and I knew what was happening, and I had to just—" She stopped. "I don't do well with that, with having to wait." "Neither do I," he said. "How did you manage it?" He thought about the holding room, the flickering light, Rosa's note on hotel stationery, a small word in familiar handwriting. "Someone sent me a message," he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. Something passed between them in that look. Not resolved, not named, not anywhere near the kind of conversation that the next several weeks and months, and the entire weight of legal proceedings and corporate reconstruction would make very difficult to have in any deliberate way. Just present, just acknowledged. The specific quality of 2 people who have been through something together and are standing on the other side of it and are not yet sure what the other side looks like, but are at least sure they are on it. "Lily," Victoria said. Rosa sent a note, he said, and Lily added a line. What did it say? He reached into his jacket pocket. He took out the folded hotel stationery and held it for a moment. Then he handed it to her. She read it. Read it again. She said 3 seconds, Victoria said. She doesn't know what it means. It's just, she knew I was in something and she was telling me she wasn't worried. He paused. She always says the exact thing. Victoria folded the note carefully. She handed it back. She sounds like someone worth being careful for, she said. He recognized the words. He had said them about Lily in her office weeks ago. She had kept them. Yes, he said. She is. Across the atrium, Reyes was wrapping a witness interview and looking at his watch with the expression of a man calculating how many more hours this night had in it. Webb was talking to 2 of his security team near the east exit, gesturing at the floor plan with the focused energy of someone who has recently discovered something about themselves and is still integrating it. The screens on the atrium walls showed the Sterling Global logo in standby blue, steady and unchanged, as if the building had simply been waiting for the room to quiet down enough to resume being itself. Ethan Cross stood near the north wall in his worn jacket with a bandaged forearm and 12 years of weight he'd been carrying by himself, and felt, not resolution, because resolution was a specific kind of closure that real things don't usually produce, but something adjacent to it. The sense of a door that had been wedged open for a long time finally sitting flush in its frame. Not locked, just resting. He thought about Castillo, Park, and Devereaux. He said their names quietly one more time. The morning after the gala, the city woke up to news it didn't quite know how to hold. The coverage was fragmented in the way that coverage always is when the story is larger than the available framework. Headlines that reached for the shape of it without quite finding the edges. Sterling Global Gala disrupted by law enforcement action. Former board member detained. Company CEO addresses shareholders following security incident. The financial press went deeper, pulling at the threads of Holt's network with the focused energy of people who had been given a very large knot and unlimited time to work on it. The national outlets ran the photographs, Holt leaving the atrium between 2 federal agents, his drink abandoned on a table behind him. His face doing the work of a man who has decided that dignity is the only remaining currency and is spending it carefully. Ethan saw none of it that morning. I was at the kitchen table at 7:15 with a cup of actual hot coffee because Rosa had made a full pot before she left at 6, and had also, without being asked, made a stack of pancakes that she had left covered on the stove, with a note that said, "Eat something real." Our Lily was across the table from him. She had not gone to school. He had not told her to stay home. She had simply appeared at breakfast in her regular clothes instead of her uniform, poured herself orange juice, and sat down with the specific quality of presence that communicated she had made a decision and was waiting for him to recognize it. He recognized it. Rosa said you were working, Lily said. I was. She said it was important. It was. Lily turned her orange juice glass in a slow circle. She had her mother's hands. Long fingers, the habit of holding things lightly. I saw your name on my phone this morning, in a news thing. He looked at her. What did it say? That you were involved in something at the Sterling building. She looked up. It said you'd been arrested. I was detained, he said, for about 18 hours. They released me. She absorbed this. Her face was doing the thing it did when she was processing information faster than she was letting on. A particular stillness around the eyes that he had learned to read as the opposite of vacancy. Did you do something wrong? She asked. No. Did someone say you did? Yes. Was it true? No. She nodded once, slow and deliberate, like someone crossing an item off an internal list. Okay, she said. He looked at her. That's it? What else is there? She picked up her fork. You said no. No, it wasn't true. You don't lie to me. She cut into a pancake. Do you want to tell me the rest of it? He looked at his coffee. At his daughter, who was 13 years old, and eating pancakes with the pragmatic calm of someone who had decided long ago that her father was a specific kind of complicated and had made her peace with it. Yeah, he said. I do. So he told her. Not the operational details, not the server room logs or the routing architecture or the specific mechanics of what had happened on the 43rd floor. but the shape of it. The 12-year shape of the thing that had been following him since before she was old enough to walk. Cardinal Bridge in the version that a 13-year-old who knew her father well enough to read his silences deserved to hear. The three men. What had been done? What had, over the last several weeks, finally been done about it? Lily listened without interrupting, which was itself a kind of gift. She was not naturally a non-interrupter, which she had inherited from her mother along with the hands and the eyes. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Those men," she said, "Castillo, Park, and Devereaux." "Yes." "You say their names." He looked at her. He hadn't told her that part. "Rosa told you." "Rosa didn't tell me anything. I heard you once. A long time ago. I was maybe 8. She looked at her plate. "You were in the kitchen at night and you thought I was asleep and I heard you say 3 names. I didn't know what they were." She looked up. "Now I know." He sat with that for a moment. The kitchen was quiet around them. The morning light came through the window at the particular angle it came through in autumn, filling the room with a warmth that would be gone by 10. "I'm sorry you heard that," he said. "I'm not," she said. "It made me understand something." "What?" "That you carry things." She said it simply, without accusation, and that you carry them because they matter to you, not because you can't put them down. She looked at him. "That's different." He looked at his daughter. 13 years old. Science projects and spider concerns and an orange juice she turned in slow circles when she was thinking. His wife's hands and his wife's eyes, and something that was entirely her own. A particular quality of clear-sightedness that he had watched develop over the years, with the specific awe of someone watching something grow that he had had very little to do with. "You're going to be okay," she said, not as reassurance, as assessment. "Yeah," he said. "I think so." She nodded and went back to her pancakes. The legal proceedings unfolded over the following weeks with the grinding institutional momentum of cases that are large enough to generate their own gravity. Garrison Holt was formally charged on 11 counts spanning financial fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy, the latter category opening the door to the Cardinal Bridge inquiry, which the federal authorities had formally initiated within 72 hours of the gala. The man who had operated under the name Gerald Foster was identified as one Raymond Kowalski, wanted in connection with 2 previous federal investigations that had never quite reached him. He was charged separately, but connected to the same case architecture, and the federal prosecutors who received Ethan's documentation spent 3 days reading it before one of them called Reyes and said, in the specific understated language of people who have learned not to overreact to anything, that it was thorough. Mercer cooperated. He had been cooperating since the night of his arrest, in the progressive way of a man who has correctly read the dimensions of a situation and is methodically reducing his exposure. His testimony connected 6 additional members of Holt's network who had not appeared in Ethan's documentation, people operating in the peripheral architecture of the conspiracy, the maintenance layer that kept the machine running without direct fingerprints on its output. His sentence would be significantly reduced as a result. This was the kind of outcome that felt imperfect because it was imperfect, and Ethan had sat with it for several days before arriving at the place he usually arrived at with imperfect outcomes, which was that the alternative to imperfect accountability was no accountability, and no accountability was what had existed for 12 years, and he had personally observed what 12 years of no accountability produced. He could live with imperfect. What he could not have lived with was silence. The fabricated evidence against Ethan was formally withdrawn and the record expunged within the first week, which Reyes handled with the dry efficiency of someone completing a procedure they had always known was a formality. He called Ethan to confirm it and said, "Clean record, not that it was ever going to stick." And Ethan said, "I know." And Reyes said, "The Cardinal Bridge families are going to be notified. Castillo's sister has been waiting for information for 12 years. And Ethan said, "I know." And there was a pause on the line that held more than either of them said into it. "You did right by them," Reyes said. "It took too long," Ethan said. "Most things do." A pause. "That doesn't make it nothing." He thought about that after the call. He thought about it the way you think about things that are true without being entirely comforting, holding it at a slight distance, not rejecting it, not quite embracing it either, letting it exist in the space where honest things exist when they are not yet fully integrated. It had taken too long. And it was not nothing, both things, at the same time, without resolution. That was how most true things actually felt, in his experience. I went back to work at Sterling Global 12 days after the gala. He had not been asked to. Victoria had been explicit, in the conversation they'd had 3 days after. A phone call. Both of them still in the processing period of everything that had happened, the kind of conversation that keeps interrupting itself because neither party has fully sorted out what they want to say, that his position was secure, that the company had no claim on his time during the legal proceedings, and that she would understand completely if he needed more time or if the circumstances of everything had changed the calculation about what came next. He had listened to this and said, "I'll be in Monday." A pause. "You don't have to—" "I know," he said. Another pause. "Okay," she said. He went in Monday. The building felt different and didn't feel different, which was the accurate description of a place where a significant thing has happened, but the ventilation system still hums, and the coffee machine in the third-floor break room still takes 40 seconds longer than it should, and the security operations center still smells like old carpet and filtered air. Webb was there. He had apparently not taken any time off, which tracked. Webb was the kind of person who processed events by working through them rather than away from them. And the past 2 weeks had produced a version of Marcus Webb that was, not dramatically but noticeably, different from the one who had stood in a lobby 8 weeks ago and told Ethan about the temp agency 2 blocks east. He was at his desk when Ethan came in, and he looked up and said, "How's the arm?" "Fine," Ethan said. The forearm had healed cleanly, leaving a new scar over the old scar tissue that Lily had examined with the dispassionate curiosity of a person who had grown up understanding that her father's body kept records. "The loading dock recommendation went through," Webb said. "Full implementation. Also, the north stairwell camera blind spot you flagged in week 1. Facilities finally fixed it." "Good." "I submitted the report under both our names." Ethan looked at him. Webb looked at his desk. "You did half the work on that one. Seemed right." Ethan put his jacket on his chair. He sat down. "How's the jaw?" Webb touched his face reflexively. The bruise had faded to a yellow-green at its edges. "Looks worse than it feels." "That's usually how it goes." "I got a commendation," Webb said, in the tone of someone who finds the word slightly uncomfortable. "From the board. Hargrove drafted it. It says—" He picked up a paper and read from it with the specific detachment of someone quoting something they haven't fully processed. "Demonstrated exceptional judgment and decisive action under unprecedented circumstances." "That's accurate," Ethan said. "I hit one guy and held him down. You moved 12 people through a building under active threat. You managed a real evacuation and a covert extraction simultaneously with no brief and no backup plan. You made the right call on 3 personnel without time to think about it." Ethan looked at him. "That's not nothing." Webb set the paper down. He was quiet for a moment. "Reyes told me about Cardinal Bridge, the actual version, not the public version." Ethan said nothing. "3 of your men," Webb said. "Yes." "And you still—" Webb stopped, started again. "You still came in here with nothing. No resources, no backup, no one who knew who you actually were. And you just worked." Ethan looked at the monitors in the Security Operations Center, at the camera feed showing the building in its ordinary Tuesday morning state, at the lobby where he had stood 8 weeks ago with a paper cup of cold coffee, waiting to be processed out like any other applicant. "What else would I do?" he said. It wasn't quite a question. Webb looked at him for a moment longer. Then he turned back to his desk and pulled up the morning's access logs, and the room settled into its working quiet, and that was that. The conversation with Victoria that he had been having in installments, in phone calls and brief office meetings, and once in the building's service corridor during a logistics walkthrough where neither of them had planned to say anything personal, but it had happened anyway, completed itself on a Tuesday afternoon 6 weeks after the gala, in her office, after the last of the board meetings related to the internal restructuring had concluded. She was at the window when he came in. She had the look she sometimes had at the end of long days and long processes, not exhausted but inhabited by a specific quality of tiredness that was different from exhaustion, more like the feeling of a material that has been under sustained tension releasing gradually, the way it happens when things finally begin to resolve. He sat in the chair across from her desk. She stayed at the window for a moment, looking at the city below, and then she came and sat in the other chair. Not behind the desk, but in the one beside it, which put them at the same level without the desk between them. "The restructuring is done," she said, formally. "The board approved the new advisory structure this afternoon. Mercer's seat is gone. The 3 financial figures from Holt's network who were on peripheral committees have been removed. Everything that was compromised is being rebuilt." She paused. "It's going to take time." "It always does," he said. "The Cardinal Bridge families, Reyes told me the notifications went out last week." "Yes." "Castillo's sister," she said. "Did she—" "She called me," Ethan said, "a week ago." He looked at his hands. "She said she'd always known. She said the not knowing had been the worst part. That even this, even it being as bad as she'd suspected, was in some ways easier than the open question." Victoria was quiet. "She wasn't angry at me," he said, and his voice had a quality in it that he didn't try to manage. "I'd been prepared for that. I thought she might be. I wasn't there. I survived when they didn't, and that's a thing people can reasonably be angry about." He paused. "She asked me what he was like. Her brother. What Castillo was like." "What did you tell her?" "I told her he made terrible coffee and was the best navigator I ever worked with, and that he used to hum to himself when he was nervous, which was constant, and that once during a 12-hour hold in a cargo bay in the middle of nowhere, he taught 4 of us to play a card game he'd made up himself that made absolutely no sense by any consistent set of rules." He stopped. She laughed. She said that sounded exactly right. Victoria looked at him. Her eyes were doing something she wasn't managing. "He sounds like someone worth remembering," she said. "He was," Ethan said. "They all were." A silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. The kind that has weight and warmth at the same time. The kind that comes after things have been said that needed saying, and neither person needs to fill the space immediately. "My father knew," Victoria said eventually. "I've been thinking about it since the federal team found the supplementary documentation. He knew more than the file showed. He had been building something, not a legal case, more like a record, evidence that something wrong had happened and that it hadn't been properly addressed." She looked at her hands. "He didn't get far enough." "No," Ethan said. "I keep thinking about what he would have done with what you built, with the full documentation." She paused. "I think he would have done exactly what you did, gone through the proper channel, made sure it was airtight before it moved." She looked up. "He was patient like that. It drove me crazy when I was young. I wanted him to just act, push. He always said the same thing." "What?" "He said, 'The ground only holds what it was prepared to hold. You rush the preparation, you lose everything.'" She looked at Ethan. "I didn't understand what that meant until recently." He sat with that. The afternoon light was doing the thing it did in her office at this hour, coming in sideways, long and warm, filling the room with the specific quality of light that belongs to the end of things and the beginning of other things simultaneously. "What happens now?" she asked. "With the case?" "With everything." He looked at her. She looked at him. The question was doing the work of several questions at once, and they both understood that, and neither of them reached for the version that was easier to answer. "The case moves through the system," he said. "That's going to be a year, probably more. Holt's attorneys will work every angle. The federal prosecution is solid, but it's large, and large cases have long timelines." He paused. "The Cardinal Bridge inquiry will take longer. Federal inquiries into classified operations don't move fast, and there are a lot of people with institutional interests in keeping certain aspects of it contained." "But it's open," she said. "It's open," he said. "That's what matters. Open cases have gravity. They pull in the right direction." "And you?" He looked at the window, at the city below, which was doing what cities do, moving, constant, indifferent to the individual weight of the things happening inside it, which was not callousness, but simply the honest mathematics of scale. A city is not equipped to feel every specific grief and resolution within its limits. It just holds them. "I have a job," he said, "a real one, with an actual salary." He looked at her. "My daughter has a science teacher who assigns projects about spiders, and a card game with no consistent rules that she plays with Rosa on Friday nights, and a birthday that I now have enough money to do something more than dinner and a cake from the grocery store bakery." He paused. "That's a lot, actually." Victoria was looking at him with the unguarded quality she occasionally let through when she had decided to stop managing the distance between what she was feeling and what she allowed to show. "It is a lot," she said, quietly. He looked at her. There was a conversation here that had been building for weeks in the margins of other conversations, in the specific quality of silences between operational updates, in the note on hotel stationery, in the 2 words her father had written in blue pen in the margin of a classified file that had somehow, through a chain of events that neither of them had designed, brought them to this specific office on this specific afternoon with the sideways autumn light and the city below and the accumulated weight of everything that had happened between an applicant nobody believed in and the woman who had looked through a glass and seen something she hadn't been able to categorize. He was not going to rush it. He had learned, at considerable cost, the difference between moving when it was time and moving before it was time. The first kind of movement built things. The second kind broke them. "Your father's note," he said, "not closed." Yes. He was right. It wasn't closed. He looked at her. "It is now." She held his gaze. "What does that feel like?" she asked. He thought about the honest answer. He thought about Castillo's sister laughing over a card game with no consistent rules. About Lily saying you carry things because they matter to you with the clear-eyed certainty of someone who had understood her father better than he had understood himself for a long time. About a holding room with a flickering light and a folded note that said 3 seconds in handwriting he would recognize anywhere now. "It feels like something that took too long," he said, "and like it isn't nothing." She nodded, slow, like someone recognizing a sentence they've been waiting to hear in a language they've known all along. The things that happened after did not happen in a single moment. They happened the way most real things happen, in accumulation, in the ordinary time between significant events, in the small exchanges that don't announce their own importance while they're occurring. Garrison Holt was convicted 14 months later on 7 of the 11 counts. His network was formally dismantled through a combination of federal prosecution and international financial enforcement that took 2 years and produced, as a byproduct, the reopening of 3 separate cases that had been considered cold. Kowalski, Foster, accepted a plea arrangement that required full cooperation and testimony and resulted in a sentence that was, by the standards of what he had participated in, insufficient. Ethan noted this. He did not say much about it. Insufficient accountability was still accountability, and he had made his separate peace with imperfect outcomes several months earlier in his kitchen over hot coffee and Rose's pancakes. The Cardinal Bridge inquiry took 18 months to reach its formal conclusions. The report, when it was completed, ran to 412 pages and included, in its 3rd section, a formal acknowledgement that the mission's failure had resulted from corruption at the organizational level and that the unit's members, including those who had been discharged, had operated with full integrity throughout. The administrative discharges were formally rescinded, records corrected. It was a document. It was paper. It did not give back the 12 years or the 3 men or the wife who had gotten sick while he was trying to disappear from a life that had been taken from him. He read the section about the unit 3 times. Then he put it in a folder and put the folder in the filing cabinet in his home office, next to the world's okayest dad thermos that had survived the entire operation without incident. He said the names one more time. Castillo, Park, Devereux. Then he closed the cabinet and went to make dinner. Webb stayed. This was not a foregone conclusion. In the restructuring, there had been a period where his role was formally under review, along with several other positions, and he had sat in the uncertainty of that with the specific discomfort of someone who has recently discovered that he is more invested in a place than he had previously understood. The review concluded with his promotion to Deputy Director of Security Operations, a title that had not previously existed, and that Victoria had created with the specific intention of reflecting what Webb had become rather than retrofitting him into a category the old structure already had. He came to Ethan's office the morning the formal offer letter arrived. "Deputy Director," he said, holding the letter with the expression of someone who finds the word slightly too large for normal use. "Accurate," Ethan said, without looking up from the access log review he was running. "You recommended this. I provided an assessment of the operational structure and the personnel best positioned to fill the gaps in it. The decision was Victoria's." "Ethan." He looked up. Webb looked at him. Something in the man had changed in the months since the assessment mat. Not transformed. Nothing so dramatic, but shifted. Like furniture that has been moved 2 feet and changes the whole sense of a room without altering the room itself. He was still Marcus Webb, still physically imposing and professionally certain, and occasionally harder to redirect than a structural wall. But the certainty had developed a new quality. It had become something more like actual confidence, which is different from the performed kind in the same way that a load-bearing wall is different from a decorative one. "Thank you," Webb said. Ethan held his gaze. "You earned it in a maintenance corridor under a building while people with tactical earpieces were positioned at every standard exit. You knew the non-standard ones. That's the job," Ethan said, "knowing what isn't on the map." Webb looked at the letter. Then he looked at Ethan with the expression of someone who has something else to say and is deciding whether to say it. "I treated you badly," he said, "at the start." "You were protecting something you'd built," Ethan said. "I came in from outside with no visible credentials and took the top position. That's a reasonable thing to push back on." "It wasn't just that." "No," Ethan agreed. "It wasn't just that, but it became something else." He looked at Webb. "People become what the circumstances keep asking them to be if they're paying attention. You were paying attention." Webb was quiet for a moment. "My dad used to say something like that," he said, unexpectedly. "What did he say?" "He said, the point isn't to be the same person at the end as you were at the start. The point is to be better, and to know why." He paused. "I thought that was obvious when I was young. I thought I already knew why." He folded the letter. "Turns out knowing why is the harder part." Ethan looked at him. "Yeah," he said, "it is." Webb left. The Security Operations Center settled back into its working quiet. Outside, the building moved through its ordinary afternoon. Access logs and camera feeds and the 40-second flicker of a fluorescent light on the 3rd floor that facilities had still not replaced, which Ethan had stopped reporting because he had, somewhere in the past several months, become faintly fond of it. Lily turned 14 in the spring. The party was larger than the 13-year-old version. 11 friends. A venue that was not the apartment living room. A considerable quantity of a dessert that Lily had specified with the precision of someone who had opinions about dessert and was not embarrassed by them. Ethan managed the logistics with the particular competence of a man who had planned extractions through corrupted urban environments and found that a birthday party for 14-year-olds operated on similar principles. Anticipate chaos, build in redundancy, and never assume the schedule will hold past the first 15 minutes. Rosa came. She sat with Ethan for a while near the back of the venue, watching the party happen with the patient pleasure of someone who has enough years behind her to understand that watching people you love enjoy themselves is its own category of experience. "She's going to be something," Rosa said. Ethan watched his daughter move through the room, laughing at something, gesturing with both hands, turning to include someone who had drifted to the edge of a group. The specific social generosity of a person who notices who is on the outside of things and instinctively moves to fix it. "She already is," he said. Rosa looked at him. "You're different," she said. "Different how?" "Less like you're waiting for something to go wrong." She said it simply, without making it a diagnosis. "You used to carry yourself like that, like the next bad thing was just a matter of time and you were trying to be ready for it." He thought about that. "Maybe I was." "And now?" He watched Lily pull someone into a group photograph with the cheerful, irresistible insistence of a person who does not believe in bystanders. The room was loud and warm, and lit with the specific, impractical lighting that venues use for occasions designed to be remembered. "Now I think the next bad thing is still a matter of time," he said, "but I'm not spending the good time getting ready for it." Rosa nodded. "That's the difference," she said. Victoria arrived late. She had come from something, which she always came from something, and she had texted ahead to say she'd be there, but not when. And she came in the side door and stood near the back for a moment, scanning the room, and Lily spotted her before Ethan did and crossed the room in 8 steps and said something that made Victoria laugh. A real one, the kind that moves the whole face. And then towed her toward the dessert table with the absolute confidence of someone who has decided this person belongs here and is not interested in arguments to the contrary. Ethan watched this from across the room. Something settled in his chest. Quiet, unannounced, not dramatic. The specific feeling of things being where they belong. Victoria looked up from whatever Lily was explaining about the dessert and found him across the room. Their eyes met for a moment in the particular way that eyes meet when two people have been through enough together that a look carries more than a look normally carries. She gave him a small nod. He gave one back. There is a thing that happens to people who survive extended periods of vigilance, not the dramatic kind of survival, the movies and explosions kind, but the sustained quiet kind, the getting through it year by year kind. What happens is that they sometimes forget how to stop watching the exits. They build their lives around the assumption of threat, not because they want to, but because the habit has become structural, load-bearing, necessary, the thing that has kept them upright for so long that removing it feels like removing a wall. Ethan Cross had been watching exits for 12 years. He had watched them in Ohio apartments and school pickup lines and the grocery store and the jobs that paid the bills and the nights when Lily was asleep and the apartment was quiet and the weight of everything he was carrying had nowhere to go except inward. He had watched them in the Sterling Global Security Operations Center and in maintenance corridors and in holding rooms with flickering lights. He was still watching them. He probably always would be to some degree. Some habits become part of your nervous system and you don't get them back. And that is not only loss, it is also partly what kept you alive long enough to need to worry about it. But he was also, increasingly, watching other things. The way Lily's laugh had started to sound like her mother's in the upper register. The way Rosa made coffee that was always slightly stronger than necessary and never apologized for it. The way Webb stood in a doorway now, differently than before, with the specific posture of a person who has decided they belong in the room. The way the Security Operations Center looked at 7 in the morning before the building filled up, when the camera feeds showed empty corridors and the city outside was still deciding what kind of day it was going to be. The way Victoria's office looked in the late afternoon light when she forgot to manage the distance between what she was feeling and what she showed. He was watching those things. That was the thing that nobody tells you about the other side of a long vigilance. Not that the watching stops, but that there is more to watch. That the same attention you turned outward for years, scanning for threats and exits and the next bad thing, can turn toward the good things too, if you let it. If you build the habit deliberately, the same way you build any other operational habit, by doing it when it doesn't feel natural yet, by treating it as necessary rather than optional, until the day it becomes both. It is not a transformation. It is not a before and after. It is slower and less neat than that. A gradual reorientation, like a ship changing course in open water, where the change is real but takes distance to see. Ethan Cross was not a different person than the one who had stood in a corporate lobby in a worn jacket with a cup of cold coffee, waiting to be told he didn't belong. He was the same person, the same hands, the same history, the same 3 names said on significant days. He was just also now a person who had done something with it. That was the part he would not have been able to explain to someone who hadn't lived it. That carrying things and moving forward are not opposites. That the weight doesn't have to be put down to stop being a burden. That sometimes the act of making the weight mean something, of building from it instead of just under it, is the only kind of resolution that actually holds. He had learned this not in a single moment, but across 12 years of ordinary mornings and difficult nights, and a daughter who looked at him with clear eyes and said, "You carry things because they matter to you," and meant it as the highest possible evaluation. She was right, and it was enough. On a Thursday morning in early spring, Ethan Cross walked into Sterling Global's headquarters at 6:58, 2 minutes earlier than his habit, because the coffee downstairs was better than what he made at home, and he had admitted this to himself recently without making it a character failing. He nodded to the overnight security staff. He took the elevator to the 3rd floor. He sat down in the Security Operations Center with a coffee that was appropriately hot and pulled up the morning's access logs. The camera feed showed the building waking up, lights coming on floor by floor, the first employees arriving through the lobby, the city outside filling with the specific noise of a Thursday deciding to be ordinary. He looked at the feeds, at the building, at the ordinary, undramatic, workable shape of a Thursday morning. He drank his coffee. Outside, the city held everything it held, its 1,000 ongoing stories, its accumulated weight of things finished and unfinished, its constant motion that doesn't stop for resolution or grief, or the specific quiet moment when a person realizes, without ceremony, that they have arrived somewhere they didn't know they were going. Ethan Cross had arrived, not at an ending, at the thing that comes after the part that needed to be over. The part that is just the next thing, ordinary and imperfect and real, stretching forward without a visible limit. He opened the first log. He went to work.